When Americans think about Osama bin Laden, a lot of words probably come to your mind. They probably do not include the words devoted family man. That is until yesterday when the New York Times called him a devoted family man in a headline. Then they understandably had to go back and change that headline. Here with us now to talk about that headline change, Ashley Rinsberg, author of The Gray Lady Winked, How the New York Times Misreporting, Distortions, and Fabrications Alter History. Ashley, good to see you. We appreciate it. A headline such as this, devoted family man, Osama bin Laden, does that happen by accident?
No, there's never such a thing as an accident with the New York Times. They're too careful of an organization, too organized of an organization to let these things kind of slip. This is intentional. This was something they chose, and it was something that reveals their biases and their own operating assumptions. And, you know, it's very telling when you see this kind of thing happen.
Media, I called them their loser of the day for having to go back and change this headline. When you think about it, and you've done so much reporting on the New York Times, is management angry about something like this, or are they just angry that they got caught?
I'm not even sure they're angry they got caught, because if you go and read this piece, this was a book review, it's actually worse than the headline. I mean, in the piece itself, they talk about bin Laden as a devoted paterfamilias, which when you think about that, you have to ask, what is the New York Times definition of a family man? And how can Osama bin Laden possibly fall into that category? I mean, this was a murderer. This was a mass murderer, a terrorist, a bad human being, evil guy by all accounts.
And yet with multiple wives, many of whom were conceivably there, perhaps not exactly at their own will. We could leave it at that.
Right.
And you're right, yeah. They heralded him. We've talked a lot about the New York Times and sort of the various influences on them. Obviously, you have the influence of people like who wrote this headline and wrote this piece. You were on earlier this week to talk about the influence of Chinese money on the New York Times. This struck us from the Brookings Institute, hardly a right-wing think tank. China's grand strategy to displace American order. One could imagine buying advertorials in the New York Times and talking about having media relationships and financial relationships between the Communist Party and the New York Times is part and parcel of trying to rebalance the American order.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in a mediated world today. The media is everything. That's where influence is dealt. And the New York Times, Ben Smith, their media reporter, star media reporter, earlier this year, did this big piece about how China is buying influence across the global media. He neglected to talk about how this had been going on at the New York Times for 10 years.
I'm sure you were shocked. I'm sure you were absolutely shocked that he didn't include that.
Yeah. I was really, I was on the floor with that one, yeah.
Ashley, great work, and it's tough to investigate something like the Times. I know that getting in there and doing that is difficult. We're glad to have you here to talk about it. It's an important story. And come back and talk to us as more things develop and you see more headlines like Osama bin Laden, the family man.
I'll be there. Thank you, Mila.
Up next, the face of climate change, John Kerry. We're going to look into whether he really practices what he preaches.